my hope would be that the organization keeps changing, reinventing itself to figure out new and better ways to get food into the hands of people that are food insecure.
Thank you for joining us today for our 50 Faces of Feeding South Dakota podcast in recognition of the 50th anniversary of Feeding South Dakota. Today we are visiting with Matt Gassen, who is the previous CEO of Feeding South Dakota, as an opportunity to learn more about the history of the organization and how things have changed over time. Matt, thanks for joining us. Thanks for coming back.
You're welcome.
Welcome home.
Yep, pleasure to be here.
Feels all right to see you.
Feels like home, yep.
Is it a lot more relaxing to not have to worry about how things, you get to just come and chat and go?
Certainly, yep. You just get to come and just visit with people.
But it's probably true because you have, Lori has been CEO now for 3 years, so you've been retired for 3 years.
Yep.
Is it true that the work and the nonprofit, the heart for the organization doesn't really leave? How are you feeling about that?
Right. Yeah, I would agree 100%.
Yeah.
I think the passion for the mission stays with you forever.
Mm-hmm.
It's, you don't think about it as much as maybe you did when you were working, every day. But even in retirement, I still have a passion for those people that struggle each and every day to put food on their tables.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. How many years did you lead Feeding South Dakota?
Almost 23 years.
23 years, okay. So tell us a little bit about how your leadership with the organization began, because it wasn't Feeding South Dakota and it wasn't a statewide food bank when you began the work of fighting to end hunger in South Dakota, right?
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, my career starts way back in the mid-'90s, and I was still in active duty Air Force. I was stationed at Ellsworth Air Force Base. Me and a fellow first sergeant at the base were asked to join the board of the food bank in Rapid City, which was the Black Hills Regional Food Bank at that time. So, as part of our civic duties, which is a box you always wanted to check when you were in the Air Force to help you prepare yourself for promotion, we did that. And so I sat on the board of directors at the food bank for 2 or 3 years. And, in 1998, I retired from the Air Force and, was still on the board at that time. And I just decided that, that's something I enjoyed doing and wanted to continue to be a part of that. So I just stayed on the board after I retired. I went to work for some gentlemen that were selling insurance and investments. And about 8 months into that, I went to a board meeting for the food bank one day, and the director announced that he was going to retire. And I said, this is what I want to do. I'm going to throw my hat in the ring. And so I did. And I was fortunate and blessed enough to get the job. So in officially January 1 of 1999, I started my career at the food bank, at the Black Hills Regional Food Bank.
So at that time, the food bank, if I recall right from my history lesson, was about 15 years it had been open. It opened in the early 80s, right?
Right, yeah. I think the food bank in Rapid City opened in like 1983.
Yeah,
So, it would have been right about that 15, 16-year mark that it had been in existence when I took over as a director there.
So what was it like, you'd been a board member, so you understood the operations, but, using the mindset of today, what the organization looks like, take us back to what that food bank was like back in 1999. What was the service area like? And
at the time I took it over, having been on the board, I was on the board as part of that process when that food bank, when the Black Hills Regional Food Bank became an affiliate of Feeding America.
Yeah.
And so to do that, it's a long history, but Feeding America always assigned each food bank service territories based on counties. So there was a time when the Food Service Center, which is the food bank here in Sioux Falls at the time, had the entire state. They were already an affiliate of Feeding America.
Okay.
And so for the Black Hills Regional Food Bank to become an affiliate of Feeding America, they had to be given some service territories. So that meant Sioux Falls had to give up some of their counties to allow the Black Hills Regional Food Bank to become an affiliate, which they graciously did. And they gave the Black Hills Regional Food Bank the 9 most western counties of South Dakota as their service area. And so that's when we became an affiliate of Feeding America along with the food bank in Sioux Falls.
So what was the programming like in the Black Hills area at that time? How did people receive food through the food bank? Did they have to come
The
to
food
the
bank
food bank?
is really kind of its original food bank model, which was more based on a wholesale distribution kind of model that you'd have in the for-profit world, and that we gathered food and we redistributed that food out to organizations. Different than what it is today. Most of those organizations actually came to the food bank to do their shopping because it was a pretty small operation.
Sure,
right?
sure, yeah.
With only 9 counties, but there was a lot of miles involved in those counties, and so we kind of started that way, or that's the way it was when I took over as a director, and we eventually evolved to where we were started to do some deliveries to some of the more remote organizations that we were serving in the northwestern part of South Dakota and those kinds of things. But yeah, it was really still kind of a small mom and pop operation.
And do you recall, I say that because a lot of numbers have probably been thrown at you over 23 plus years, what the staff structure was like? How many people were helping to keep that work going in those 9 counties?
Well, when I started, there was 3 paid staff.
Okay. Wow.
And we operated with 3 paid staff and a group of volunteers for quite a while. I had another gentleman that was kind of a permanent volunteer. He'd come in every day, and eventually I said, why am I letting this guy just volunteer? Why don't I just pay him?
Yeah.
So we hired him on, and Larry Welke stayed with us for 27 years, I think.
Wow,
long
great.
time.
That's great. So what was the food insecurity atmosphere like at that time?
I think it's not all that different than what it is today.
Okay.
I think the unique thing about the mission is it really, at its core, hasn't changed that much. Mm-hmm. The numbers fluctuate up and down as the state is growing. Obviously, there's more things happened in our country that have impacted food insecurity, recessions, and those kinds of things. So, yeah, those numbers have gone up. But at its core, food insecurity, especially when you're in western South Dakota and you're dealing with reservations and those kinds of things, they're still pretty relevant to what's going on today.
Okay, so talk about what happened then. So you're in Black Hills Regional Food Bank. Things are going. You've got these 9 counties, and then what?
Well, and then long about 2002 or so, the director of the food bank here in Sioux Falls, that organization then was called the Food Service Center, left the organization, and so they had a vacancy for a director of the food bank here in Sioux Falls, and so I threw my hat in the ring. Was fortunate enough, again, and blessed enough to get that job. So I moved to Sioux Falls with my family to take over as the director of the Food Service Center, all with the intent all along. And even when I interviewed with those board members, I was openly shared that it was my intent and hope that we could take the 2 organizations and bring them together to create one, because really the missions were identical. The only difference was who was serving what counties. And it seemed obvious to me that from Sioux Falls, it was really hard to serve some of those counties west of the river.
Right.
And so why should we let just a 9-county boundary limit our ability to serve people? So long and short of that is not too long after I was hired, in fall of 2002, in 2003, we launched into a kind of a merger analysis. We got the 2 boards together, had the discussion about it. They were both in agreement that it was worthy of looking into. So we brought in an outside consultant to help us walk through this merger analysis process. So we spent about 8 months doing that. And at the end of the 8 months, both boards voted unanimously to merge. And so officially on January 1 of 2004, we became, at that point, the Community Food Banks of South Dakota.
So many names. I know.
Yeah, you're
doing great.
Yeah. It was a long name, and believe me, for 6 years we battled with having that name before we rebranded to become Feeding South Dakota.
Yeah. Well, and that's a great segue into the next area. So you become the Community Food Banks of South Dakota. You're serving the entire state.
Yep.
Which at that time, I don't know as far as Feeding America members what it looked like, but today, Feeding South Dakota is one of 17 food banks that serves an entire state.
Yep.
Otherwise, most of our states have multiple food banks within them, serving geographies like you mentioned. So you come together as one, serving the entire state, still a member of Feeding America.
Yep.
And so, tell us a little bit about, because Feeding America was also going through some name change.
Right.
They weren't always Feeding America. And so at what point did we transition to that Feeding South Dakota? Like, what was that process like?
It was really quite a unique process, actually.
I figured this could be quite entertaining.
Yeah. It was, we realized, after 6 years, that the Community Food Banks of South Dakota was just such a mouthful that nobody ever used our real name. It became Food Banks of South Dakota, whatever derivative of its actual name
people
used. But it was just really difficult. Emails were,
weird.
Feeding, it was just terribly long. So we started looking at rebranding.
Okay.
Ironically, at the same time, we were also preparing to establish a new distribution site in Pierre. Okay, so that was going to take us from a facility in Sioux Falls and Rapid City and adding a third one in Pierre, which for obvious reasons was the right thing to do because it allowed us to better serve the state from 3 locations and from 2. But as we went through this process, we hired a consultant here in town to go through a multiple of brands, names, and logos and those kinds of things, and nothing that they could come up with just really felt right. Just prior to that, months before, America's Second Harvest, America's Food Bank Network, which was their name, rebranded to Feeding America, and often wondered why we couldn't use that logo and that brand, right? But we were told no, that couldn't happen. So I go to a director's meeting with the CEO of Feeding America in Minneapolis. So she did these regional little get-togethers with food bank directors from those areas would come and visit and sit down and have an open conversation and questions. So I'm sitting there with Vicki Escara, who was the CEO of Feeding America at the time, and I ask about the rebrand, about the use of the Feeding America name and logo. And, she's got staff that are saying, no, we can't do that. And then she slipped up and said, but, we have one, the Food Bank of South Florida, Feeding South Florida.
Oh,
so
boy.
They had already allowed it to happen in one place. And then it was just like,
well,
the room
done.
went silent because she knew she had just let the cat out of the bag. And so with that, we then went back and pressed, and they allowed us to use really, the derivative of the Feeding America logo and just, Feeding South Dakota. So
which was a really smart decision because it aligns our organization and our work with a very strong brand that's recognizable. But not every food bank is a feeding something, right? And that probably is because there's multiple food banks within states.
I think for many food banks it was a struggle with, we've got this age-old name and logo that we've been using for 20 years, and our donors and our people and our communities, and everybody knows that, and they were just really, and to this day, some still haven't given those up. They just they feel so strongly about that. But, for us, we'd gone through a merger and name changes, and it was, so it really didn't impact us that much. We didn't have that, that 20-year history of a name and a logo, so we were at a prime spot to do that.
Yeah, exactly, because it's like a fresh start. It's like, okay, here we are. Here's what we are and who we are. So then at this point, you're Feeding South Dakota. You have 3 distribution centers. You're serving the entire state, all 66 counties through these 3 regions, and business is moving along. Food is getting distributed, and then we have a global pandemic.
Yes.
Whose name we shall not mention. So I'm curious, had you announced your retirement prior to the onset of COVID-19?
Oh, heavens no. Nope. We were just cruising along, doing our thing each and every day, like the rest of the world was. And then all of a sudden, in, March of 2020, everything in the world stopped, really. And it left us in a real sticky situation. Businesses were closing down, or they were cutting way back. They weren't doing things they normally do. But for us, the one thing we knew is that we had to keep doing what we were doing. We didn't have a choice. Food distribution, especially to those that are struggling, was going to be paramount to taking care of the people of South Dakota. We also knew that it didn't take long to realize that the pandemic was going to create more need for food than ever before. People started going to grocery stores and the shelves were being empty and they couldn't find stuff. And what they had, they couldn't afford, kind of a thing. And so, we had to make some really, really tough decisions, some challenging decisions about how we were going to operate and function as an organization. And so, we went into full box packing mode. We shut down our pantry because we couldn't just have people conglomerate or coming all together in one location because of the fear of spreading COVID and all that kind of stuff. So we had to close the pantries. So the individuals having access to the food to pick what they want was out the window. And we went into a complete food box mode, packing pre-packed boxes of food for distribution, doing all of our distributions external to the organization. So we were doing mobile distributions in the communities to try to get food out to people in need. Staff, really stepped up to the plate and took on not only the challenge of the work, but the challenge of running the risk of acquiring COVID, because so much was unknown about COVID at that time, and if you got it, what kind of impact it was going to have, what are the consequences going to be from having gotten COVID. We did a couple things. We split our staff in half. We had half of our team was working at a remote location off-site. The other half were coming into the building every day. That way our thought was that if somebody had come down with COVID in one location, we had to shut that operation all the way down.
That's smart.
We still had another half of us still going, and vice versa. So, we had a team, a small team that worked remotely off-site every day, disconnected from the rest of the food bank family here, and it was really challenging. But it worked well for us. It allowed us to keep going and keep food moving and getting it in the hands of people. And a lot of the model that we created to deal with COVID has stayed with us after that, post-COVID, right?
Right, because pre-COVID there were mobile food distributions, but very few, and only in our urban areas, not out into the rural areas. But when COVID came, and I realized South Dakota was a little bit different, but there was still this initial shutdown. Like you mentioned, grocery stores, restaurants, everybody advised to stay home, And so that included our agency partners out in those rural communities who are those food pantries in churches or hot meal sites or shelters that people would normally go for food access. Now we're not open. But to your point, people still needed to be fed. And I remember the news, the giveaway, the lines of cars, not just here in South Dakota that Feeding South Dakota was serving, but across the nation. You saw these just lines and lines of cars. And so it transitioned that mobile distribution out into the rural community. And as the COVID pandemic slowly came to a resolution, really the realization was that that's where food access is the most difficult, is in those rural areas. And so continuing to get there was important. And so I think when I started 3 years ago, we were at like 130 or 127 mobile food distributions every month across the state, which is a lot.
Yeah,
it's a lot.
Of work.
So what do you think as a leader during that COVID pandemic time, what was the greatest challenge for you?
One, food procurement became a bit of a challenge for us, being able to secure not only the quantities, but the kinds of foods that we needed, because there was such a huge demand everywhere in this country for food. Manufacturers, weren't producing it as fast and as much as they were prior to COVID. So that process slowed down. One outbreak COVID, we saw it. at the meatpacking plant here in Sioux Falls, they had somebody come down with COVID. They shut the whole plant down.
Right. Right.
And that was happening to national manufacturers who had always been huge donors into the food bank network with their product overruns and excesses that they would share. And so if they shut down, so went the donation. So procurement was one of the big challenges, and then obviously. Trying to take care of the staff, trying to keep everybody safe, both not only staff, but also those that we served, So we had, the PPE stuff going on to try to make sure that, we could keep each other safe and also those that we were serving.
And the work of the organization really became instrumental in health opportunity, or maybe that's a stretch, but for individuals facing hunger, because the food bank started distributing at-home test kits and various PPE equipment along with the food to give access to individuals and make sure that they were able to stay healthy and have those additional resources that they needed. Yep. So that sort of expanded the vision of what the food bank can do.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it soon became evident because of the way we had shifted our model of distributing food to making virtually everything mobile, both urban and rural, that other organizations saw the fact that we were touching so many lives in any given week that we became a conduit for some of their services as well. And so it really kind of added some new facets to the work that we were doing around food insecurity.
So it was sort of a blessing and a curse.
Yeah, I mean, certainly it was. But at the time, it was an opportunity.
Yes.
It was really an opportunity, not only for us to connect with other nonprofit partners in the communities, but also to provide necessary items and things to those that we were serving beyond just food.
And really, I think it spotlighted the ability of the organization. I mean, feeding people, distributing food across the state might have been something that just sort of to everybody's daily view was running in the background. But when something like this pandemic hits and it's obvious that we're positioned to get food out into all 66 counties in an emergent way, it really sort of spotlights that capability and kind of sets the organization up for, that future success.
Certainly did. Yep. And I would go back to say one other thing I would add about that. I always said that the true heroes of the COVID pandemic in this organization's history were the volunteers. We had volunteers that would come out and help pack boxes every day.
Yeah.
Hundreds, if not thousands, of volunteers that risk their health to come out to support us, to help us be able to pack enough food boxes to be able to meet the demand that we were seeing across the state. And they really were the silent heroes in that whole 18-month ordeal that we dealt with COVID.
And they still are for the work that the organization does. And, we are a volunteer-based organization, and I know that's well known, but we are serving far more people year over year. And that requires more food handling, more produce sorting, more box packing, and that is all work that is done by volunteers.
Yep. And COVID helped us realize and be able to increase our capacity for the utilization of volunteers to help us in the work that we were doing.
Yeah,
I don't know that we truly realized how much impact they could have on our current and future distribution of food. Until COVID. COVID really kind of was an eye opener for all of us about the value and the amount of food that we can help move if we utilize more and more volunteers.
It was over 17 million pounds of food in 2020, which is just an incredible amount of food. I mean, even today, it's, last fiscal year we were just over 14 million pounds of food. We're serving a lot of people with that food, but the volume of food that went out during the COVID pandemic, and then if you offset that with what the volunteers had to do to get it there, it's a pretty incredible thing to think about.
Sure.
As much as leaders and staff can strategize and think and try different things, it really just comes down to those who are willing to come in and do the work.
Yep.
And being able to keep up with that year over year, our increase, and it seems maybe I'm going to make this sound too easy, but almost seamless, because when we say, hey, we are in need of help, people show up.
Yep.
And that's the beauty of the mission, that it's not just the staff that are here and the board that guides us, but the volunteers that come in are here because they have that heart for service and they have that passion for the mission.
Really do. And they're really the engine that makes it go. Behind the scenes. They really are. Volunteers are so incredibly valuable.
And was that a big shift as well from when you started at Black Hills Regional and then brought the two together to what it looked like by the time you retired?
Certainly, because from 1999 in my world till I retired in 2021 or whatever it was. I can't,
2, 3,
21, I suppose. Of course, the amount of food that we distributed in the areas that we served and how we served those areas all were growing, and so there became more and more need for those volunteers or for the use of volunteers to help us. But I go back to my first year at the Black Hills Regional Food Bank in Rapid City, and we used volunteers once a week when a semi would come in. So we'd bring in a handful of volunteers to help us unload the semi, right? Because that was a big deal.
Right.
The world stopped. We shut down the food bank
because there's a semi.
Because there's a semi coming.
Yeah.
And to where it is today, you have 5 to 10 semis showing up in this building on any given
on the
day.
regular. Yeah.
And they're unloading them in 30 minutes or less because the staff has gotten so efficient about doing it. So, there's been a lot of change in that. But, we've utilized volunteers in some form or fashion ever since I began.
So we talk about our mission is to end hunger, and that is a lofty mission. It's a heavy mission, especially because there are so many things that impact food insecurity rates, which have continued to be on the rise since COVID-19. As a matter of fact, the Feeding America Map the Meal Gap, the most recent study that came out comparing 2023 to 2022, it was the largest jump in a food insecurity percentage across the nation since the 1980s. Yep. And so, that people are still recovering. And I don't think anybody expected to come out of that pandemic. And then those pandemic era benefits went away for many families. At the same time, a recession or a high cost of living came into place. And so it was sort of like a perfect storm, which we are now seeing a lot of dual income families coming to our programs and saying, I just don't have enough to stretch this month, or the cost of childcare went up and I just can't afford both, but I need to get to my job. Was it like that as well when you were doing your work here with the food bank?
Certainly. Yep.
So that's not really much of a transition. It's not just one type of person coming to receive food.
No, it's. That really, those times that you're talking about, whether it was COVID, whether it was the recession, now it's inflation, those kinds of things. I always said there's a certain population of America that lives on the edge, right? They're doing okay, they're living paycheck to paycheck. But then you have a significant event happens in our country, like a COVID, like a recession or something like that, and a huge chunk of those people fall into the abyss, which means no longer do they have any money left at the end of the month. I always say there's too much month left at the end of the money, kind of a thing. And they do all of the measures they can to try to make that money stretch as far as they can, but they can't. In the first place you cut, the easiest place to cut your budget is food. Yep. So you start skipping meals and want to make sure the kids get fed so mom and dad don't eat as much or whatever the case might be. And it becomes a downhill spiral for those families. And so that's when we wanted to always be there to be able to provide them food so that they could concentrate on the other things that they needed to concentrate on to live day to day and to get through the week or the month.
It really is essential.
Yes, it is. It is.
So what do you think in your 23 years with the food bank what are you most proud of? What is your greatest takeaway from your time here?
Well, obviously it's always been the mission and the people, whether it's the people that I've been blessed to work with or the people that we've served. I think the start of the backpack program.
Yes.
I think that was a watershed moment for this organization. I think it really changed how people looked at the organization. Merely by us providing food to children on the weekends, when they were out of school, they getting Monday through Friday, they were getting their free reduced meals at school. On the weekend, they had nothing, and then they'd come back to school on Monday, maybe hungry because they hadn't had enough to eat. So we tried to fill that gap, and that was a program that just took off like a rocket.
It is our most recognized program. When we have new volunteers or new supporters, many know about the backpack program, and so that's great. And it also gives us opportunity to talk about the other work, but that absolutely is a significant.
I think establishing that third distribution site in Pierre was a big moment for us, because that really gave us another location in which to better serve. We were able to divide the states into thirds, kind of an east, middle, and west to better serve organizations and individuals. Obviously, COVID was huge. I mean, to get through that the way we got through that, I think it really helped us. It helped put Feeding South Dakota on the map in the eyes of people in our state and the communities, to realize, what our mission was and how good we were at doing it, right, and how we can manage that. And the new buildings that we built, the building we built in Pierre, the building we built here in Sioux Falls, I think were all significant moments in the history of the organization. And so I look back over that time, and I just I'm so fortunate. I feel so blessed. I had two careers in my life. Both of them were about 23 years long. First one was the Air Force. Second one was food banking. And I always pinch myself because I thought about all of the people that we served. So many of those people that we served who had to get up and go to work, to a job that they really didn't like, maybe even hated, but that's what they had to do to survive, to keep things going for their families. And I was blessed enough to have two 23-year careers that I loved, both of them, and just how rare that is, that you get to go through your working life doing things that you love to do.
And making an impact.
Yep, and it wasn't that there wasn't tough times in both those careers. There were.
There were probably days you woke up and said.
But there wasn't a day that I regretted doing what I was doing.
Yeah.
And so I just feel so blessed and fortunate to have got to been able to do that. In the food banking world, it was just knowing that you had the opportunity to touch so many lives.
Yeah.
And be supported by so many people. I think the other thing in all of this is one can't forget the donors.
Yeah.
Those people that supported this organization, both with their time and their talents and their treasures. And how there was literally thousands of people that supported us financially to allow us to do what we did and what you are doing now.
Yeah.
Right? That continues on. And I think we owe so much debt of gratitude to those people who put their trust in this organization.
Because while the organization receives some food through federal USDA programs, we are completely privately funded through individuals, through grants and foundations. We're not state funded. We don't receive dollars from federal dollars. And so really our ability to continue this work is because we have so many great people who understand the importance of the work and the mission. Yeah,
I always said we were a public-private organization, but the public part was a very minuscule piece of what we did. The largest part of our organization was private.
Yeah.
That public part was just what you're saying. It wasn't really dollars that were coming from the federal government. It was commodity foods.
Yes.
So if you put a value on all of that, we're talking somewhere less than or right at 10% of our total annual expenditures.
Yeah.
Were public funded,
right,
so to speak.
Yeah.
And that was only because we're putting a value on that donated food.
Right.
So we, by and large, we're more private by far than we were public.
And still remain to this day. So as you talk about all these great things that happened in your 23 years here, and all things you should be very proud of, and your passion for the mission remains, what do you hope for or envision for the work that Feeding South Dakota will continue to do in the upcoming years?
Well, I mean, if there's any staff that are still here from when I was here 3 years ago, I think they could all tell you that, one of the sayings, I'm a sayings guy, I got isms, Matt isms. But one of them was always that the only constant is change. Mm-hmm. I mean, if we're not changing, then we're not getting better.
That's so
as
true.
an organization. And I think that still holds true today. That my hope would be that the organization keeps changing, reinventing itself to figure out new and better ways to get food into the hands of people that are food insecure, and more effort into whatever it takes to get it to them, to get them the right kinds of foods. And I don't think people understand that, at the end of the day, this organization is as much logistical as it is charitable.
It is.
It's a huge logistical organization.
Absolutely.
It's about moving product and food around.
Yep.
We talk about the donations coming from national donors. Well, you got to get it transported from where it's being donated on the east or the west coast to South Dakota. You got to bring it into the warehouse. You got to break those loads down. You got to redistribute that out to either organizations or individuals. And it's just the movement of food within the state is mind-boggling. I think if people really sat down and knew what it took to move a can of food.
Yeah, the work. It is hard work. From all of it, from the conceptualizing where we're going to get food to securing that food to getting the food here to getting the food out. It's a puzzle.
Yep.
It's a puzzle out of 3 distribution centers.
So, my hope for the organization is that it continues to grow, and not for the sake of growing, just to grow, but grow to meet whatever need there is in our state, and that, that we still strive. It's you talk about it being a lofty goal. It might be an impossible goal to eliminate hunger in the state of South Dakota, but it's a goal that you cannot keep from striving to achieve, and I think that's what I hope this organization continues to do.
Yeah, and I think it's so true because I tell people often that, I'm trying to work myself out of a job, and not many people can say that, but that would be the ultimate. The ultimate would be if an organization like Feeding South Dakota didn't have to exist, because people had access to the food that they need to thrive in our state. Right. And that's the work we're doing today is getting food to people in their time of need. But there's work that has to be done to address the reasons they're there in the first place. Yeah. And so that change and that evolution to say, we need to meet the need now, but how can we ultimately get people out of this line? How can we get them to a place where they don't have to worry about this or have to skip a meal? Because there are so many people doing that. And much like you, I'm so proud and passionate for the work that we do here. And it's so great to be part of an organization where every person I work with shares that passion. Right. Every donor or supporter that I talk with shares that passion, every volunteer. And so that really motivates you to keep moving forward and keep assessing and changing and adapting, because you never know when the next COVID-19 is going to happen either.
Yep, you gotta always be ready. Let's hope it doesn't happen again, but yeah, it could. And so to have been a part of this organization from 1999 until 2001, 2002, it was, and to watch the growth, to be a part of the growth.
Yeah.
I don't lay claim to being responsible for that, but just being a part of that ride as this organization has grown to where it is today is something I'll always cherish.
And you should. Well, speaking of, we, in honor of our 50th anniversary, we're digging through some historical photos.
Okay.
I dare say that. Do you recognize this guy?
I do. That was a long time ago. He was a lot younger looking. Yeah.
Any guess what year this is? I'm just seeing on the back that there is
2003.
2007.
Oh.
At Terrace Park, Matt Gassen of Sioux Falls Food Bank. There's a phone number on here. I wonder if that still works.
Yeah, that would have been for Terrace Park. That would have been for Jam Against Hunger.
Oh, yep. Sure.
One of the 20 that I did.
Wow. That's okay. Good music.
Yes.
How about this? I don't, there's no name on this, and I don't know, the person's pretty far away, but.
That's me driving a forklift in our old warehouse over on First Avenue.
Over on First Avenue. And how long was the food bank there?
Wow, that's a good question.
I'm curious what kind of food
I'm not 100% sure how long we were there. I think I used to know that number.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
They built that building over there on First Avenue, and they used to have the pantry and the food bank used to be in the same building here in Sioux Falls down on North Phillips Avenue.
Okay.
And they eventually built this warehouse and moved the food bank part out of it and kept the pantry downtown.
Gotcha.
And then we eventually moved the pantry out of that building downtown because it was just logistically, it was becoming a huge challenge moving food from the food bank downtown.
Yeah, as downtown was probably growing and evolving.
Yeah, it was, and it was really time for us to bring everything together under one roof. And then from there, we realized that we didn't have enough space, that we needed to build a building. So ultimately, we ended up building this building.
That is the challenge of moving more food, is the space. I see the food racking doesn't go quite as high as it does in the warehouse today.
That building. That was only about 20,000 square foot of building.
Oh, wow. Thank you for joining our third episode of 50 Faces of Feeding South Dakota and listening in on our conversation with Matt Gassen. Matt has an incredible history here with Feeding South Dakota, and we're just so grateful that he gave us the time that we could tap into all that knowledge and all the fun stories that he had for us today. We hope you've enjoyed the podcast so far. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you catch the episodes that air every Friday. Thank you.